François Ecalle,
François Ecalle,
expert de l'économie et des finances bien connu, ancien de la Cour
finance,
des comptes, et
from the
depuis
court,
un certain
the Cour
nombre de
de
mois
comptes,
et années,
and for some months and years, an
écouté par le
expert
biais de
listened
FIPECO
to
que vous avez créé, que vous présidez.
organization
Alors,
FIPECO that you
François Ecalle,
preside as
tous les
president.
comités et les
François
experts
Ecalle,
sont
all the committees and
alarmistes face
experts
à la situation
are
financière
alarmist
de la
about
France.
France's financial
Docteur
situation.
Ecalle, est-ce
Doc,
grave?
is it really that serious?
C'est inquiétant, en tout cas.
Yes, it's worrisome.
L'INSEE a publié il y a un quart d'heure
Lindsay,
le
already
montant de la dette
15 minutes
publique
ago,
à fin
has
juin.
spoken about the
Elle a dépassé
debt.
3 400
It's
milliards et
already
plus de 115% du
more
produit
than
intérieur brut. Les
a
économistes
very
préfèrent
high
toujours ne
range
pas
of
parler
the
en euros,
percentage of
mais pour faire
GDP.
des
They
comparaisons
prefer
dans le temps et
to
entre
talk about
pays,
euros,
rapporter la dette
and
au
they
produit
also
intérieur
want to
brut,
look
le
at the
PIB,
debt
donc
for
plus de
the
115%.
GDP.
Est-ce que c'est grave?
For
Peut-être revenir un peu en
115%
arrière. D'abord,
increase
rappelez
is
quand même
now
que la dette
recall
publique,
that
le
the
déficit
public
public,
debt
c'est pas seulement le
and
déficit et la dette de l'État,
is not
c'est le
only the
déficit et
state
la
debt,
dette de
it
ce
is
qu'on appelle
also
les
the debt of what
administrations
we
publiques
call
en
the different
comptabilité
public
nationale,
administration
c'est-à-dire non seulement
in
l'État, bien
national
sûr, mais aussi les
accountability, not
collectivités
only the
locales
state but also
et
local
les organismes de
collectivities
sécurité
and the
sociale, plus
organizations of
quelques
social
centaines
security,
d'organismes
some
contrôlés par
100 different
l'État et
organizations
financés par des
and
subventions ou
financed
des
by
impôts.
different grants or
La
by
dette publique,
taxes.
c'est
Public
l'accumulation de
debt is
déficits publics.
accumulation
Donc,
of
cette dette
public
publique, elle vient
deficit.
de
It
l'accumulation de
comes from the
déficits depuis très
accumulation
très
of
longtemps. C'est
deficit
une
for
très longue
many
histoire.
years. It's
Si
a
on
long
remonte au
story.
début de la
If we
Ve
go back to the
République,
beginning of
c'était
the
un
Fifth
excédent à l'époque, c'était pas
Republic,
un
this
déficit, c'est devenu un déficit.
public
Un
debt
déficit
has become a
qui
deficit,
augmente
which
à
is
chaque fois
connected to
qu'il y a
and
une
increasing each
crise,
time when
une
we have a
récession, un
crisis, a
ralentissement. Ça, c'est
recession,
normal.
slowing
Ce qui est
down.
beaucoup moins
This is
normal, c'est
normal. What is
qu'ensuite,
less
on a beaucoup
normal
de mal à le
is
faire
that
revenir
we
au niveau
are
antérieur. Et à peine
having
est-il revenu
problems
au
of
niveau
having it
antérieur
go
que
back
nouveau
to the
ralentissement d'activité,
previous
nouvelle crise, etc. Et donc,
amounts
ce
when we have these
déficit,
new
il est
crises.
sur
So
une
this
pente
deficit
croissante
is
depuis 50 ans.
increasing
Donc, c'est
already for
l'imprévoyance des
50 years.
gouvernants qui
So
pose
this is
problème.
Tous les
also
gouvernants,
the
l'histoire ne remonte
government
pas à
center cause.
2017
Yes, well,
ou
it
je
doesn't
sais
go
pas
back
quand.
just to
L'histoire, elle est
2017.
très
Really,
ancienne.
it's an
Alors,
old
qu'est-ce
story.
qui est nouveau dans cette
Now,
histoire
what
et qui
is
fait
new in
qu'aujourd'hui,
the story? Why
finalement,
that
la dette, elle
today
augmente,
the
on a
debt is
l'habitude.
increasing, and we're
Qu'est-ce qui est
used to
nouveau
that.
aujourd'hui?
What
Il y a
is
deux
new
choses nouvelles.
today? There are two new
D'abord,
points.
que notre
First of
situation
all,
relative par
our
rapport à nos partenaires
situation
européens
compared to
se
our
dégrade.
European partners is
L'année dernière, la dette
deteriorating.
publique française
Last
était
year,
la
the public
troisième
debt
de l'Union
was
européenne. Il
the
n'y a plus que les
third,
Italiens et les Grecs
and
devant
now we
nous.
have the
Il y a pas
Italians
si
and the Greeks
longtemps,
are
il y
ahead
avait
of
aussi les
us.
Espagnols,
And
les
we also
Portugais et
have
les
the
Belges.
Spanish, the Portuguese, and
Donc
the
la troisième
Belgians
et la
that are doing better.
le deuxième
And
élément nouveau,
another
c'est les
element
taux
which is
d'intérêt.
new
On a
is
vécu
the
pendant
interest rates for
20
many
ans, depuis
years,
la
for
création
20 years
de
since the
l'euro,
creation
avec
of the
une baisse
euro.
des taux
We
d'intérêt
had
négatifs, avec le
negative
paradoxe que la dette
interest
publique
rates
augmentait en
and
euros et la
public
charge
debt was
d'intérêt
increasing
baissait en
euros,
euros.
and then
C'est
we had
fini. Et
also
aujourd'hui,
this charge
ça
lowering.
rend beaucoup plus
But now
difficile, je dirais,
things
la
are
maîtrise
more
des comptes
difficult
publics.
to really master
Il y a
the
quelques
public
mois, j'ai
accounts.
publié une
Some
tribune
months
avec
ago, I
Olivier
published
Blanchard,
with
l'ancien économiste en
Olivier
chef du
Blanchard, the
FMI,
former
dans lesquels on
economist
expliquait
with the
qu'avec des hypothèses
IFM,
raisonnables
we were explaining the evolution of the interest rates and the growth of activity issues to stabilize public debt in percentage in euros compared to the GDP. The effort necessary was some 120 million euros, and reference is not 44 million, it's 25 in this calculation, and 25 after this year already in this year. So we are very far from the good result. What happens if we don't do this? If we don't do this, public debt will be continue to increase. It's already triggered off with the same hypothesis for the increase in the interest rates. We now at 130% of GDP in percentage. So the Italians were able to stabilize their debt. We're going to increase, and now we risk to have a problem in the markets, and so we, because of the situation, so we have to, because of the situation of reimbursement, the marker is the difference of the interest rate between France and Germany. It hasn't increased very much. Why? Because we have a guardian angel in Frankfurt. They know that they are capable of buying in a limited quantities. As Mario Draghi was talking about the public debt from the Eurozone area. One day they might remember that it's not automatic, that they can only do this for a country which makes efforts to stabilize its debt, like we were obliged to do, the Portuguese were obliged to do this, the Greeks, etc. So this will happen to us. I don't know when this is going to happen with the Cour des Comptes. We are going up against a wall. We don't know how much distance we are from this wall. all. It could take some years. We don't know, but we need to do something. Yes, you're talking about this, and will we not be faced with different arbitration? We sometimes are reading, maybe we need to arbitrate between, as we call it, the guns and the pensions in this complicated situation. We will need to reinforce and have priorities investments. So we look at education, research, digital defense. Is it not necessary to have a certain balance? This is what we hear between all the different social benefits to have our sovereignty that is assured, but also we have the different investments that are necessary for the future generations. Well, the best situation is to have a stronger growth. All of the governments dream about that. Now, there are also different obligatory payments, and these essentially, we need to have savings in public areas. 120 million euros if we want to respect our engagements with and to have the military that we have, the NATO. If we would, then if we want to respect these commitments with NATO, then we'll have these increases. Also with the different greenhouse gases, then we need X amount of money. So the effort is tremendous. We need to make choices. If we look at the past, the public debt and deficit, and we look at the different, we need a balance. We have the different. In the long term, there has been quicker increases in debt rather than the growth. And what has increased quicker? This is social benefits. This is health and retirement that is increased. What has increased less? Which is this is investment, education, the defense, of course. So these are the priorities that have been made in the past, which are not just choices, but it's also related to demographic issues. And we also, when we look at other countries, similar situations, when we compare public defense, public expenditures, we are the second behind the Finnish governments. And also there's the race between the Finnish and the Danes. Now, when we look at the different retirement, education, defense, and expenditures, we have these different major spending areas. And it's similar to other countries. We spend more in retirements, yes, less in education, yes, that's true. We are not very different, though, but the situation currently of public expenditures, we need to have priorities, we need to make choices. Yes, we see there's a set between retirement and also health. Now, health, we already know for long, the cost of healthcare is increasing more than GDP. Now, when we look at the different figures and you talk about the public expenditures, we know the weight of pension compared to health. And now these budgets, public budgets for health, is it at the core of the problem for you? And also, when we, is there not also an enormous structural problem concerning the pension rather than versus health? When we look at the level of deficits, for example, last year in the Banque Maladie, some 15 billion, it's when we have 160 in comparison deficit. So the local collectivities also are 12, 13 million deficit. And the retirements last year, we look at all the different schemes, were very close to a balance. But the reasoning, the local officials, in fact, their reasoning is they say there's a mistake coming from the state. Yes, this is true. And they're pointing the finger at the states at the local level. If I were at Bercy, said yes, they have all these different grants for local level and the retirement. You have the big debate now. Yes, but behind this, we have this issue about balances, lots of grants. It's an enormous deficit. We're hearing all of this. For me, these debates are secondary. What we see are international observers and the creditors is the public debt. The breakdown of deficits between the local collectivities and the different health insurance issues are secondary. The problem is to reduce public deficit. If we don't want to do too much, we, of course, will have to have contributions that will increase, but we don't want to have too much increases in taxes and contributions. We have to look at how we can have less expenditure. So we have retirement, 20% for health, 20% local collectivities. I do not see how we can have an effort that's so important without touching the retirement, local collectivities, and health care. So, in fact, there's a lot of deficits that are hidden. We were talking about this, and Pascal Dufray was describing this in detail. Is there not a transparency need for the different costs, which in fact should be arbitrated by Parliament? When we look at, for example, we have different increases of the compensation, and this we had different issues with the health illness insurance. Now, is there not a need to have more transparency concerning the structure of costs? There is a problem, and one of the main reasons for which the state is bearing most of the deficit is already, for a long time now, the state has reduced taxes or social contributions. They have reduced this, and also the local collectivities, they also recently had the taxe d'habitation, also tax that was actually removed. And so now we have half of the VAT issue. So the state has really been the ones that have taken up this and the coverage of these kinds of issues. So we can talk about all these things, but the state is assuming its role as responsible for the macro, etc. balances. There have been efforts made. If we look at the evolution of the different staff in the public administrations, or we have statistics going to, and in recent years, there's been an increase in staff, and by 46% to the local collectivities. So why? Because in the Sarkozy, there was a reduction in staff. So we had 120,000 staff at that time in Sarkozy, which were reduced. But now the state is the one that is making efforts right now. They've increased staff. So education, for example, other expenditures to the budget of the states. What is the situation? There are other areas where we're going to have arbitration for expenditures. If we want to increase our military by X billion, 46 billion, for example, we need to make efforts. Education is another area, more cautious about education. The first president at the Cour des Comptes was saying we have to be careful about this issue. It's not very useful to touch certain areas, but education is an investment for the future. You have digital investments, and etc. So this is not where we're going to make lots of savings. Now, arbitration issue. We talk about health. You have to have this balance. You say all of this is something related to the state's role. Is there not a need to have a more objective arbitration than what we have today? We always need to have more objective criteria. I would have tendency of saying that we have to take up these considerations, yes, but everything is not always transparent enough. It's not always evaluated. We have economists who could do more political economic evaluations that would be needed, because we need to have more transparency. If we follow what I would tend to say of saying myself as an economist, academic background, it's better to understand, evaluate, have clear objectives. For 30 years, I've really been saying this. So these evaluations, political arena, require information we don't have. It costs a lot of money. It's not always very conclusive. It's never black and white. It's in a gray area. So there are choices that need to be done, and there are political choices. Yes, we now, we all here, we see that Sébastien Lecornu, he is trying to really put together and make a balance these different areas to increase expenditures, but at the same time you have these different pressures. And now we talk so much about what you talk about this tax issue. Now, in any case, notoriety is important to mention here. Now, by listening to you, you are talking about the fact that there are three main areas in which you, in fact, you want to actually have less impact of the state. We need to make economies, savings, but even if you insist on the public debt and deficit, but we need to have savings, and we have to come up with also revenue. So maybe Monsieur Lecornu would, which because you say, well, what would be your view on all these things? What would it be? Not only the first measures, but including all these different elements we have to measure. How do you approach that? First of all, concerning pension, the 2023 reform, the aim is to ensure that the retirement age increases, because when you reduce it, then you have less active population in the long term. And so the incomes are affected by that. And also for this affects also the local collectivities. So to increase the retirement age, to get this solution, there are other things we can do. We can play with the number of years of contribution to have the full retirement. There are political choices. You have to keep in mind that to have the same effect on the retirement age, that you have a minimal age, you have to have more, an increase of more than a year for contributions to have full retirement. So these are the kinds of choices we have to look at. We have to keep these aims. And this also concerns the future pensions, but for the current ones, I'm sorry for those who are retirees, but there is an easy automatic way, which is this the indexation of the pensions, 2-3 years, and then health is more complicated, because we see with pensions, it's enough just to play with 2 or 3 parameters to have the mechanical effects. And so, but of course, it's more complicated. But then, of course, we have, compared to the OECD countries, we have excellent security, social benefits. We are at solidarity levels of mutualization of risk, which are very high in France. Now, are there room for maneuver in this area? Yes, in fact, yes, we do have this out-of-pocket expenses, which are amongst the lowest in the EU. No, I took it. We have the lowest household out-of-pocket expenses in health. So we could increase as we have different lump sum issues we can work on. But for obvious reasons, each time when you do this, then you oblige those who have limited incomes to pay amounts of money which are difficult compatible with their income. So there is different measures that can be taken. We have solidarity health coverage we can work on, but it's very bureaucratic and complicated to have these increase in the co-payments. I believe already for a long time, I've been saying this, we have to have solitary is very important. And when, in fact, we were increasing the lump sum franchise, I published an article a few months before. I was defending already 10 years earlier, defending this argument. You would be supreming this out, and you have one measure that you do, so the out-of-pocket expenses with the obligatory would not be more than 4% of your income, and then you'll be reimbursed by 100% if you have increased this amount based on your 4% of your income. So by definition, you'll be protecting the more modest ones. And this obviously, okay, we talk about help. This would help the lowest income persons. Yes, maybe it's better than certain kinds of taxes, but potentially, I said you can make as much savings as you need. Once you have set up this, then you can be increasing some billion euros. So the complementary areas is something we could look at. Complementary health. Martin Hirsch came up with this idea in 2007. The mutuality came up with the communication saying it was a bad idea. So this does not make them happy about that. So yes, I maintain this. Now, I was talking about earlier about different measures. You said, okay, we don't touch the pensions, I take up some measures, but you were saying we today have a deficit, which is at a very high level. How can we quickly ensure that we can have the solutions? We're talking about the indexation of pensions. All of this is not enough. No, I think this effort of this GDP, and in fact, when I came up in a publication, we did this when we entered in the Euro in the 1994, for example, and also in 2011, 2015, after the crisis. We had this 5-year plan is possible, but we do the increase of obligatory contributions. And today, we have all these different taxes. We're on the podium of OECD, or on the top. I think we should not increase too much for businesses because we have the competitive issues. We have recurrent deficits, so we have to keep businesses competitive. So we have the households. I think we need to increase taxes for the households just based on their capacity to contribute. So in other words, we need to do something about the high super rich or the less rich, but not just this kind of tax that we mentioned. There are other more relevant taxes. It's complicated to explain. Now, is this something, this debate that comes up, it's a historical one? Is it something that, in fact, rather than we're just adding an extra layer? Is that what we're doing? No, this can cause problems, but in the political, social context today, I think there's a pressing situation. We need to have a budget for next year. A budget will enable us to slightly have a reduction of the public deficit. And if you look at the different polls, surveys, you see you cannot avoid to have something in that area. It's inevitable for me. We have to prepare for this. And then, and this is not enough. Yes, it's not enough. We also have the households contribution, is where we won't do this right away, but maybe in 2027, we need to have an increase in the contribution. And there are two possibilities. I was talking about the different efforts that were done in 94, 98, the Juppé's plan, and there were 2 points of increase in the VAT. We're coming to the end. I believe we have a diagnostic. The declaration has been set. I see you where you're at right now. We have triggered off discussion. Now we come up with solutions. If you want to know more, François Ecalle has this publication that about you will have all the basis of information. So his publication is very interesting. Thank you very much, Dr. Ecalle. We come up with some solutions.